killed my mother. I killed my father. I killed my mother. And in his hand he coldly gripped both the joy of growing up and the agony of being alone.
Hello, buddy. It is I, Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, here with a new episode of JMulls Explains. Today, full spoilers are in effect for Nier Automata, as I explain, what the hell is Route B? Like, when we really think about it, what is Route B? Because it's largely the same as just Route A, but just told from a different perspective. So in Route A, you play as the main character, the poster character of Nier Automata 2B. But in Route B, you play as 9S. And you play through the same series of events, just from a different perspective, but they're largely the same. So the game is essentially asking you, the player, if you want to get to Route C, which is completely different, because if this acts as a sequel to Route A and B, you have to essentially replay the events of Route A with some minor differences. For most of it. Now, granted, the very beginning of Route B and most of the end of Route B are completely different from Route A because 9S is separated from 2B. He doesn't meet up with 2B until later, a little bit in to the start of Route B. And after the events of the flooded city, 9S is separated from 2B until the main final boss battle. So it's a pretty interesting ask of the player to have them play for multiple hours the same series of events. Now, granted, in fairness to Platinum, they do try to mix it up a bit. In fairness to Yoko Taro, they do try and mix it up a bit because they add additional cutscenes and little extra scenes and pieces of dialogue in Route B that you do not get in Route A. It's different. Most of the time you are talking with a completely different operator, getting different. So the orders you get are slightly different, or just told from a different person. You get these additional little cutscenes when you go into a new zone sometimes that are like these paper puppets that I believe that are like trying to tell the story of the origins of the machines, but in a mythological sense, which is pretty interesting. And you get additional background and lore behind three main characters, one of which is Simone, which is the boss battle in the carnival section, and Adam and Eve, who are two main machine life forms that you interact with throughout the events of Route A and B. But you get additional little cutscenes just developing the relationship between Adam and Eve. It's pretty interesting how it's done, because while the events are largely the same, you are still trying to find little new pieces of background information that you didn't get before in Route A. You're adding context to the events of Route A, and that's pretty interesting. It's a pretty interesting approach, because in my opinion, the gameplay is still fun enough to where I don't mind replaying the events. The story beats are still interesting enough where I don't mind reliving them. So adding additional context with additional scenes is a pretty interesting way to go about it, because it also makes you care more about 9S, the character, because you, the player, are playing as that character. Which is pretty interesting. It also gives you a chance to view 2B from a non-player perspective, because she is your partner in Route B, she's not the player character. Which is pretty interesting. So you get an additional bit of context and more of analysis of the character of 9S in Route B than you did in Route A. Especially after the flooded city, when 9S is captured by Adam in the copied city. You get additional background and almost a character analysis, really, of 9S. And it's pretty interesting because Adam is essentially telling 9S, you aren't no hero. You just want to play the hero, but you're not a hero. You're just an ordinary android. You're nothing different. Nothing makes you special. You have ordinary beliefs, ordinary desires. You are normal. You're not some big macho hero. You aren't some superhero from a comic book. You're just an android. And you have basic android and / human desires. And it's a pretty interesting breakdown of the character of 9S. Because it lends itself to the events of Route C, D, and E. Well, Route C and then endings D and E. It's pretty interesting how they do that. Because it offers a twist on the events from Route A. And we get more, like I said at the top of the video, more context and a deeper analysis of this character. It's in preparation for Route C. That's essentially what Route A and B are, in my opinion. They are prepping the player to care about these characters for the events of Route C. Because Route C is, in my opinion, the main meat and potatoes of this game. It's where the main story beats, the main messages and themes really start to come into their own. It's pretty interesting how they tackle the story structure of Nier Automata in this regard. Because I'm not trying to say that Route A and Route B are without emotion or without themes or without messages. Far from it. It's just they serve as more like a prologue to Route C. Because Route A and B end on a happy note. And then Route C starts off on a depressing note immediately. And it just keeps piling on to that. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about Route B mechanically for a little bit, because that's important. Because, yeah, story is nice and all, but if you ask me to replay the same section, I'm going to need something to flavor the experience mechanically to make it feel distinct. And what they did was they changed how you tackle combat and the world in general when you play as 9S, because he is unique, because he can hack. And to balance the fact that he can hack, he can only use one weapon, so he can't use two like 2B can. So his overall combat is less interesting in my opinion, because you're just spamming the one button with X, or you're holding down the fire button for the pod, or the pod ability. So you can't do these combos that you could with 2B, because you could have multiple weapons. But you do have the hacking mechanic, which in my opinion makes fighting larger, more stronger enemies less of a grind and more enjoyable, because you're not just like whittling away at a massive health blob. You are hacking them, which do big chunks of and percentages of their health as damage, and also as AoE damage, and you can modify how you hack and the effects of your hacking with various plugin chips, which is pretty cool in my opinion. Though you don't get those till about halfway in, from what I found. Or maybe you could just find them immediately, I don't know. So, I prefer having 9S when it's more solo target boss battles. Sometimes. Though hacking can kind of like eliminate most of the challenge for a lot of these big battles. But for the most of the game, you're fighting multiple enemies at once in AoE situations, area of effect. And hacking's not necessarily the most engaging thing there, because ordinarily you're probably just better off using a pod ability or just attacking. And 9S's basic attack is literally just spam the attack button, and you can use your pod ability whenever you want. So it's less interesting in my opinion in that regard. But it's not like unbearably bad or anything. It's just I prefer playing as 2B and A2, who you get to play as in Route C. So, I do think Route A is better than Route B, in my opinion. I feel Route B is a bit of a step down from Route A, mainly because I prefer the combat of 2B compared to 9S, though the hacking element does open up the world more, because throughout Route A, right, you encounter various chests and various things that require hacking, that you don't know it requires hacking, because you just can't open it. So you're left wondering what's behind it, but when you get to when you get to Route B and you can play as 9S, the world kind of opens up in that regard. And you can view the world from a different perspective because you have the ability to hack. Which is pretty interesting because it also opens up some new side quests, which, in my opinion, are pretty enjoyable. I feel like they could have tackled the game designer in the basement of the carnival a bit better because it's essentially just a fetch quest. Go to this area, kill a mob, get a part, and bring it back. Rinse and repeat 3 times. But it's pretty interesting trying to debug his game and trying to find the flaws in it. Because it's essentially just a hacking minigame. I do feel that Route B has value, though, and I do appreciate the fact that it is in this game. I like the additional context and story surrounding Adam and Eve and Simone, who's the carnival boss. I like that. I like these new cutscenes explaining the origins of the machines in a way. I find those pretty interesting. And I really like it when you get to the flooded city arc and it takes a massive detour from the events of Route A because 9S is separated from 2B. I always found that section particularly interesting. I really liked going into the abandoned factory as 9S, who is on the bunker, hacking into various machines to try and get deeper into the factory to warn 2B about the Become as Gods section, and to warn them about these religious zealot robots. I really like that section. I think that adds pretty good value to it. Doesn't really necessarily add too much story-wise, besides a major reveal that 9S gets eventually. Though I did find it pretty interesting. I liked it. Trying to warn 2B by hacking various machines and get various different styles of combat as you hack a different type of machine. That's fun mechanically, in my opinion. So it's not just the fact that Route B has some different story beats and elements to it that distinguishes it from Route A. It also has mechanical differences that, in my opinion, add value to the world and change how you tackle the world of Nier Automata, which are pretty interesting. They're not the most numerous things ever. They're not the most game-breaking or game-changing things ever, but it's nice flavor and a nice different perspective on the same situation we all know and love from Route A. I think that has value. And I do believe that without Route B, the events of Route C and endings D and E would not hold as much weight or hold as much value as they do because we have Route B. Because Route B gives you the context behind Simone, behind Adam and Eve, behind the machines themselves, because it gives you the psyche of 9S, which really makes the events of Route C, D, and E hit harder emotionally than they would have without Route B. So in my opinion, Route B has a lot of value to it. Even though it's largely the same events, if you've done most of the side quests as 2B already, you can kind of breeze through a lot of these sections. Like the individual story sections of Route B and A aren't necessarily that long. Let's break it down real quick for a quick second. You start off at the abandoned factory, when you eventually meet up with 2B and 9S. Then you go to the city. Then you go to the desert for like one boss battle after you trek the desert, which is not that hard to navigate. Then you go back, and then you go to the carnival for another boss battle. Then you go back, you go to Pascal's village, you fight another Angles. You then go underground to discover the fate of the aliens. You go back to the bunker, then you go to the Forest Kingdom, leave, go to the flooded city, and then it's completely different. And like these individual sections are big cinematic and really fun mechanically, so you don't mind replaying them. And it's not like the game asks you to repeat side quests. If you just haven't done it in Route A, you can just do it again in Route B in order to complete it. So I like that. I feel Route B has value because the sections they ask you to replay are still fun and engaging in their own right, and you get additional context surrounding them. So you don't mind replaying them, or at least I didn't. Because you also know and believe that even though you're playing this, you're going to get some new context, new cutscenes, and things like that. I'm a particular fan of the cutscenes of Adam and Eve, because it expands on the relationship between those two characters. I really like how it's like, how Eve is always asking questions like, why are we doing this? Why are we eating 8 apples? And Adam's response is, humans used to do this to gain intelligence, so we're going to do it as well. I found it really interesting and really cool. I like those sections. I like how it expands the world, how it adds more complexity to these characters and develops these characters. Because in Route B, we know how Route A ends. We know Adam and Eve die. We know Simone dies. But now that we know their fate, then they give you the emotional impact. Then they make you care more about these characters. And that has a power to it, in my opinion, for storytelling. And I really appreciate that. So, there's one other section of Route B I just want to cover, and that's the very beginning. Because you don't start Route B playing as 9S. No, you play as a robot. You play as a machine. Brother, if you play Route B, you know what I was just talking about. And you essentially play as this machine in the abandoned factory, trying to wake up his brother robot, who's essentially just laying there dead and offline. So this machine comes up with the idea, machines run on oil, let me go get some oil. So you have to hop your character all the way over to this oil bucket, grab the bucket, get some oil, then hop all the way back without tripping. And then you dump it on this dead machine, and it does nothing. And 9S even comments saying, yeah, they ain't gonna do anything, buddy. And a lot of people will gloss over this section, but it's really interesting in this regard. It's adding emotional depth to the machines. And it's saying, well, this machine cares about this other machine. But it's a machine, it shouldn't be doing that. It shouldn't care about the well-being of another machine. That makes no logical sense from the machine's perspective. Which adds more depth to it and expands on the themes that Route A was starting to weave out and bring to the forefront for the player. That Route B expands upon and just goes into maximum overdrive in Route C. It's a really nice way to start Route B. Also, I appreciate how the giant flying mech suit sections are a bit different from 9S at the very beginning. You have this different perspective when you're trying to hack into these terminals to turn off the anti-air cannons to protect 2B as she's descending into the abandoned factory section. I like that tie-in, and I like how they are still adding different ways and different perspectives into the gameplay sections. This late into the experience of Nier Automata, I appreciated that when I was playing it. So, I'm going to wrap up the video there. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe if you like the video and you'll want to see more content. I know I would appreciate it. Stay safe out there. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.